you need to act based on the role you want, not the role that you're in. The ability to think, feel, say, and do things at a level at which you aspire to, not the level that you're in.
Welcome to the STEM Career Coach, hosted by Donnie Maclary. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, this is your guide to growing in STEM.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I have an amazing guest, and I'm very excited to hear much more about his background, his experience, a bit more about his journey. And if I could introduce Sumesh to our listeners. Sumesh, why don't you tell me a bit about your background experience and what you're doing now?
Hey, Donnie, firstly, thank you for having me on the show. Really appreciate it, and keen to share, what I can with your listeners. So just a bit about myself. So right now, I'm the Chief Digital and Strategy Officer at Pos Malaysia, which is the national postal carrier for Malaysia. Here at Pos Malaysia, I run product and tech. I run organizational strategy and transformation. So that's kind of my role. And before this, I spent a few years working for a couple of startups in India, and before that, I spent time with Amazon in Europe, and before that, with a startup in the Middle East, and spent about 11 years with DHL in Asia, Europe, Africa. I spent a bit of time in Latin America working for a nonprofit as
And
well.
of the
So
world.
that's a bit about my background. Yeah, I love it, right? Living and working in different countries, cultures, I find that whole thing really fascinating. And it's such a growth accelerator for me personally, I find. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for willing to share some of your expertise and some about your journey. I'm sure at the very least you've got some good food tips across the globe.
A little bit, yeah. Doesn't help that I'm vegetarian, so it doesn't apply to most of the people I speak to. But
Well, I think we should jump into our first question. Now, as someone who's driven large transformations in logistics and CX, what advice would you give to technical experts, they're stepping into, commercial leadership roles?
I think it's a big question, right? So as in my experience, technical leaders, when they want to step on to bigger and broader roles, I think one of the first pieces that I personally look for and recommend is clarity. And clarity often is mentioned, but very rarely is experienced or applied at various levels of leadership. And for me, the number one thing that I would recommend for technical leaders, especially because we sort of tend to be a little bit more in the sort of technical bubble, and so is the ability to have a high level of clarity on the why, the what, and the how, right? And so the ability to clearly not just understand this, but also articulate this and being able to communicate this effectively at multiple levels of the organization, I think is something that's really key and something that's really important in my books anyway. The second thing I would say is, the ability for tech leaders to, stop looking at problem solving in isolation and start looking at scaling, right? And essentially, the difference is subtle, but quite pronounced in depending on how you look at it. But again, a lot of sort of tech leaders tend to look at problem solving in isolation, while as a bigger and a broader leader, you need to be able to think of scaling the organization. Scaling the organization goes well beyond just a particular system or a particular process. It's about how cohesively different parts of the organizations come together or should come together for you to achieve, the next level of growth and the next level after that. So I think the ability to scale and the ability to scale not just systems and processes, but the sort of a more cohesive approach across the organization, the ability to scale the organization, scale the thought process, scale talent. Like all of these become, incrementally important as tech leaders go up the career ladder, so to speak, right? And I think, it's not just about doing more, and very often, I think we confuse hard work for effectiveness, right? Lots of people put in long hours, but as you move up, and take on bigger and broader leadership roles, for me it's not just about doing more, but it's also about thinking better, right?
Mm,
And constantly asking, do we need to do it this way? Constantly asking why or why not, and the ability to think better, evolve your thought process at a level that is required for your next sort of leadership role. Uh, and that I think it also goes very well with a piece of career advice that I once got is you need to act based on the role you want, not the role that you're in, right? And
very good
and
advice.
so
Yes.
yeah, so the ability to think, feel, say, and do things at a level at which you aspire to, not the level that you're in. I think is I think it's good, solid advice. And the last one I'd say is at the same time looking at you know how to move away from managing projects or products, but how do you start looking at a slightly more systemic approach to evolving an organization? And I think that's probably the last piece that I'd say is pretty important for tech leaders who want to take on bigger and broader leadership roles.
Absolutely. And I think, no matter what you do or what you aspire to be, clarity and understanding the why is just so important. And, I learned a long time ago, based off of, some leaders that I did not get on with or did not agree with, that the why is the most important part because that's the buy-in. That's where you get visibility to the big picture. And as you mentioned, can't be siloed into your own product or your own portion of the business. The higher you go up, the more, you have to look at the entire org. You can't just influence technology, but how technology can infuse HR, operations, finance. You got to think a little bit bigger and a little bit broader. I like to call it solutioning, where the higher you up you go, the more your problems become unique. And it's not necessarily all the same types of problems you're seeing. They're quite unique problems that you're, faced with. And you need to take all of those tools that you've learned in all the various roles and use that, and that's why you are where you're at. That's how you become an effective leader, challenging yourself and, using what you've done and affecting other parts of the business from a variety of leaders that I've spoken with on podcasts and also had, some fireside chats with. It seems to be a little bit of a theme.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The one thing I would say to that, Donnie, however, is, you know, I completely agree on the solutioning piece, but that doesn't always mean leaders need to have all the answers, right? And I
Mhm.
think
Correct.
the best leaders that I've come across are the ones who are big enough, mean enough, and humble enough to accept when they don't know something, and approach it with a true mentality of here's an opportunity for me to learn, right?
Hmm.
And I think that that sort of combination of you know evolving at a higher level, but at the same time being able to problem solve, but being humble enough to accept when you don't know something, and wanting to learn, that sort of learning mindset. I think those are some of the key things that I think make some really phenomenal leaders.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more, actually. It's having the right pieces around you, getting the best out of those around you, and it's enabling them. I don't know this. Could you help me? Just, could you imagine, if your boss comes to you and says, I think you would be the best person for this. I really need your help. How great would you feel? Just for example's sake. But correct. That was a very good addition, in my opinion. Now, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, how would you encourage, technically minded professionals to embrace, like customer first thinking in their leadership style? especially as technologists, such as yourself that have really kind of pivoted to, a lot of different business units, a lot of different parts of the business. Well, I'm very excited to hear, maybe some of your lessons learned.
I think uh, one of the organizations that I worked on early in my career. Um, you know, I was lucky enough to get a lot of exposure to the global leadership team, and I was talking to the CEO once, and basically we were talking about um, the business, and in particular we were talking about salaries and so on and so forth, and he looked at me and he said, you know who pays your bonus, right? And I said, well, yeah, I think it's you. He said, no, the customer does, right? And so essentially, one of the first groundings that I had was, let's be really clear about this, right? The customer pays your salary, the customer pays your bonus, right? And
I
so
love that.
starting with a very clear understanding of how things work, and without the customer we're nothing, is a critical component that comes with a very deep first principles understanding of how you look at it in the first place, right? And once you start looking at it from that perspective, things change, right? And things change quite significantly, because you're now saying, hey, if I'm not talking about the customer, if the voice of the customer is not in this room, then what is the point of anything that we're doing,
Truth.
right? Ultimately, if you step back and look at the business, you are building or manufacturing or developing something, so someone will end up buying it. That's how you grow revenues. And without that someone who buys it, you got no revenue. And then you can talk the fanciest tech in the world, but you don't have a
Mhm.
business, right? So essentially, I think it's for me personally, it's rooted in a very deep belief that you know without the customer, we're nothing, and we got nothing, right? And so that changes the way most people think once they truly embrace the philosophy that I just spoke about. um, Beyond that, for me it's always about, beyond the just the core mindset. It's also about making sure that your work counts for something, and it only counts for something again when the customer values what you're doing, right? And one of the things I tell my team quite often is, fundamentally, we only have three key things we're trying to do here. We're either trying to grow revenue, or we're trying to maintain or reduce costs, or we're trying to improve customer experience, right? And you know, obviously, the foundational block for all of this is you have a great team that's excited about coming to work. You have a great team that's engaged and empowered and motivated. But once you have that, essentially all you're trying to do is grow revenue, reduce cost, or improve customer experience. And you know the improved customer experience is almost the foundational basis of it, because without that you got no revenue. Without revenue you got no cost. So it goes back to the voice of the customer. What's the customer? At Amazon, you may or may not have heard of it. There's this the logic that there's always one empty chair in the meeting, and that empty chair belongs to the customer, right? And so
I've heard this say, yeah.
it's essentially when you make decisions, at least symbolically, you look to that empty chair and say, what would the customer say? What would the customer think about this? How would the customer respond if they were sitting in this room? So I think that type of systemized approaches, where you look at it's the foundational belief that the customer comes first, and everything revolves around the customer. But then it's also about what is the systemized way in which you sort of mechanize it through the organization, right? So when you're not there in the room, how are decisions getting made? Are 2, 3 levels below in the organization, are they thinking with the same mindset in terms of what would the customer say? How would the customer feel about this, etc.? How do you create systems and mechanisms that ensure that happens? Also becomes a key component of leadership.
Oh, yeah. And just realizing in that first example that you shared, who is paying the salaries, your bonuses, it's not me. Just gotta have this fancy title doesn't mean that I'm the one who's, come to check. I might sign them, but all that money is coming on for the people that we're, helping to, instill our business around, the people that are gonna, prop us up, the people who utilize the products or the platform or the solution. And a leader that is able to shift that mindset and at least, properly understand, who is giving you the bonuses, who are the key individuals that in the equation that you should be, targeting and focusing around. And happy customers, as they say in a marriage, happy wife, happy life, happy customers, happy paychecks. So I'm curious as well about, what are some of habits and skills that you believed helped you build your influence behind behind your just functional expertise?
I think the number one, and again, it's a big question, but I'm just going top of my head. I would say number one is probably a very innate sense of curiosity, and
Mm,
that's something that's always helped me. Uh, you know, just being really curious and being able to always look around you and ask, why not? Have you tried this? How could we do this differently? I think that, and it's not just about problem solving. It's about a very deep um, need. It's almost a need for you to know and learn things that you don't know. And and
mm,
and with that level of curiosity, if it really you know becomes a foundational part of who you are, I think that's super super important because if you are curious, you naturally tend to you know prod, and you naturally tend to uh, unpeel the onions and the layers, and maybe get to uh, some of the sort of fundamental truths, right? Very closely aligned to that, I would say, is the ability to deep dive. And I always prize leaders who can seriously deep dive. The ability to go super deep in a in any given situation or problem or opportunity, and find a very atomic view, view of things and build it back from the foundations. That's in my books a super super key skill for a leader to have. And very very few people in my experience are really good at that, but also very few people want to do it. A lot of people have opinions, right? A lot of those opinions are shaped on emotions. Very few people have really solid opinions based on data, based on deep dives, based on the fact that they actually know some of the fundamental truths to what they're talking about. So that's probably I'd say second. The third I'd say is the ability to demonstrate and truly embrace ownership, right? And I think if someone really owns what they're doing and treats it like you know their own, and has this super sense of ownership and drive towards achieving their goals. For me, that's again a super valuable skill, because once you have that founders mindset, ownership mindset, however you want to call it, uh, you will go very far to make something work, right? And you will push the boundaries to make something work. And very often, extraordinary results are produced by people who push boundaries. So I think that's probably another really important skill, I would say. So yeah, I mean those would be some of top of mind when it comes to skills and behaviors that tech leaders, but also broader
absolutely.
business leaders would demonstrate.
Awesome. I've been quite fortunate to work with technologists for the past almost 12 years. And one thing that is very evident in people that come from a technology background is their desire to learn. They are sponges, and their fear of being left behind because they're not up to date We can talk about tech stacks, as far as, development and, new versions of programming languages and tools, or adding, additional skills like Gen AI or cloud or cybersecurity to their already existing, toolkit. But this is why I think, technology leaders or tech individuals will eventually be across the board in C-suite positions, because they're very systematic. They're always learning. They're always pushing the envelope, and they're always trying to make their job a bit easier. Automation is a huge buzzword, with technologists and how an AI as a whole. I believe in the news recently, there's some companies that have been massive in around the globe, and it turns out they just had an army of developers that were they weren't actually AI. They were just using an army of developers, but that is the type of mindset that technologists, in my opinion, really do have. They want to learn. They want to be a sponge. They will leave jobs that are good paying jobs because they feel like they're using legacy technologies and they want to move into where the future is. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you said most of it, right? I think it goes back to that sort of innate sense of curiosity that I spoke about, right? Is
Correct.
the true desire to want to learn something, not because your job demands it, not because, not even for me, because you sort of fear being left out, uh, but because it's in your DNA that, if I don't know something, I wanna do the best my ability to go figure it out, right? And that sort of
100%.
very learning mindset of saying, this sounds super interesting. I want to learn more, right? And then actually making the effort to do it. And when you do that, it sort of becomes second nature to you, and therefore that's also the approach you start applying to problem solving, right? And you start saying,
Yes.
okay, let me gather all my facts first. Let me learn more about areas that I don't know, and therefore you tend to form a much more deeper and sound opinion of things and or problem solving abilities. So yeah, absolutely.
I know you were a little bit biased because you come from a tech background. So, I did set you up a little bit, but yeah, I mean, this is why I love working in technology. It made me excited because I'm learning at the speed of light as well. And I just am a recruiter,
Yeah.
so I can only
But
imagine a
just so you know,
technologist.
I don't come from a tech background.
Correct.
I don't come from a tech background. I actually majored in economics, and the first few roles that I worked on were focused on ops and commercial. But it's part of who I am, to say, I wanna learn more about things I don't know, and eventually, that landed me in a role where I run product and tech and a few other pieces. But at the same time, um, I've been very fortunate that I've done so many varied roles. In fact, just a tiny tidbit, the only C-level role that I haven't done is a CFO role. And
Yeah.
so I've done ops, I've done sales and marketing. I've even done HR.
People? Yeah, I've done
So
people.
so
Yeah, yeah, it's not at POS. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but I find that unbelievably interesting because I get to learn so many new things.
Well, I think STEM as a whole is infused with technology now. Like I know, economics majors, they're writing Python code in R, and now they're quantitative analysts, and developers. So everything is infused now. So I'll adopt you into, the technology
100%.
side of things. Now, as a leader, as you become a leader, the things that you hear a lot is, micromanagement, and, how do you properly, motivate and, manage individuals under you? So, in your experience, how can new leaders avoid micromanaging when moving from, hands-on roles to more people/strategy focused positions?
I think this is going to sound counterintuitive, but something that's worked well for me is um, letting go of a false illusion of control. I think generally as human beings, but particularly as young leaders, we always tend to have this false illusion of control of, if I control it, it's going to be better. If I control it, things are going to work out better, etc. So I think something that sort of worked for me is learning that the illusion of control is false in the first place, right? And therefore, results is a combination of, really good people coming together and working things out. And therefore, allowing them the time and space to be able to do that uh, can produce significantly better results than micromanaging or breathing on top of them you know to satisfy your need for control, right? And so what worked well for me was my ability to step back uh, and let the teams run the course, but have enough check-in mechanisms to be able to still understand if you're on track, and if you're on off track, why we off track, and then helping problem solve with the team. I find is a much better approach, and quite honestly, you know, it's simple things, right? If I don't like being micromanaged, why will someone who reports to me like being micromanaged? So,
For
why,
sure.
why would you do something that, you don't like experiencing yourself? So, but having said that, it's hard, yeah, and it's not easy, especially as a young manager. You have a lot riding on you, you have a lot of expectations, and again, you think, if I get involved, if I tell X or Y what to do, then we'll move faster and we'll get better results, etc. And it takes a certain level of experience and maturity to say that's not it. That's I got that wrong. It's about letting people do their best work, and people doing their best work is highly dependent on them feeling free and safe to do what they believe is their best work. So I think once you get that and appreciate that level of understanding, I think things look different.
Micromanaging to me stems from lack of trust. The more people want to manage a situation, the more they want to control everything, is essentially
Yeah,
the people that they're relying on. They just don't trust them. And for me,
yeah,
how you counteract that is asking questions. You know, not what you assume someone is great at might be something that they see themselves being great at. If you've got, in recruitment, we'll say, I know I've got consultants working under STEM, oil and gas. I'm not going to give an oil and gas role to my STEM consultants and expect the same expectations that I would have for the ones that are working in that space for 5, 6 years. It is, and one thing you said, what you were describing but didn't say, is empowerment. If you're able to empower those around you, if you're able to essentially, give them a culture that, puts their skills to good use, but also ask a lot of questions about what they want to do and pushes them in a direction that they see fit, but also in lines with the company and what you see for them, or the business or department sees for them, then to me, that's when the special starts to happen. That's when you really start to build something quite collaborative and, quite unique.
yeah, 100%. And sometimes it's about just experiencing that once, yeah, and you get your aha moment.
Mhm.
Sometimes it can be as simple as the young or manager. I don't know why we keep saying young, but that manager going on holiday to realize when he or she comes back that, hey, wow, so many things happen, and that could be something as simple as that. Could be your that aha moment to say, wow, okay, maybe we do need to give the team more time and space to be and do their own. So
To me, leadership is about learning. It is about, being a sponge. It is about every person you hire, every person that you maybe inherit to your team is very different from top to bottom. Learn as much as you can about them, learn as much as you can from them. And from there, you being in that leadership position, like you mentioned, doesn't mean you have all the answers. It just means that you have the visibility to put everyone in the right place at the right time to, achieve something great together. And even if you try, just a leader that cares, I feel like will go very, very far. Now, one thing that we'll leave on a bit is, not only do leaders, have to manage people, but, they also think about strategy. And a lot of times, especially in my role, for example, it is about, hiring and hiring where and justifications. I would be, very excited to hear, you worked in a lot of different geographies around the world. You've been all over the place. What are your thoughts on, some of the challenges of maybe hiring internationally or some of the things that companies or leaders should think about?
For me, it starts with the why. Why are you trying to do it? Are you trying to optimize for cost? Are you trying to optimize for capabilities? Are you trying to optimize for skills? Are you trying to optimize for something else? What are you trying to optimize for, and why? I think is one of the foundational questions for me, right? Once you answer the why, so let's say as an example, I want to hire internationally because I want a specific set of engineering talent that I'm unable to find locally, and or I'm able to find locally, but it's really expensive, or I'm not finding engineers who are as at the level at which I'd like them, etc. So then it goes back to, okay, right, so if your why is clear, then what exactly are you looking for, right? And when you look at what exactly you're looking for, I mean, not just a job description document, right? But what are the type of skills you're looking for? What are the what are the types of competencies you're looking for? That piece, I think, needs to become pretty clear. But I think once you get there, I think there are a few logistical challenges, right? While hiring internationally,
Mm.
particularly around making sure that, compliance wise, you're all good. If you don't have a team there that's recruiting, execution is not going to be as fast as, where it would be if you had operations. Looking at, paperwork, and who's going to administer all of that, and looking at local labor laws, and the kind of implication that could have on things, etc., etc. I think that there are a bunch of logistical slash admin related challenges, right? And of course, there are some great organizations doing some great work in the space now, so it's become much less of a hassle than what it used to be a few years ago. um, I think that's one. The second sort of set of challenges is, I think, how do you get people used to sort of asynchronous work, right? And looking and understanding how this is going to change team dynamics, how this is going to change the quality of output, how this is going to change the effectiveness of results. Is the international location time zone friendly? If it's not time zone friendly, it sort of becomes a lot more asynchronous. If it becomes asynchronous, then is the quality of output still going to be the same? I think that's sort of a sort of next big set of
Next
challenge, right?
layer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think probably one of the other big challenges I would say is, I think you know the term culture fit is not universal, right? The term
Very much
culture
so.
fit is also contextual. And so it doesn't mean the same everywhere. Just because you have a certain set of values sitting in a particular country doesn't mean it's the same way other people operate and behave. So understanding the cultural nuances, understanding local practices, understanding and respecting people for their differences, that is easier said than done. And I've seen that break many a team. And so I'd say that probably is another big set of challenges that presents itself. When you're hiring a class. So yeah, those would be some of the top of mind ones.
Great ones. No, absolutely. I think, in my experience, being in recruitment, I come across a lot of companies that are looking at Asia. I'm located in Malaysia, just like yourself. We're here in KL. There's a lot of countries in Southeast Asia that are getting a lot of traction because of quality talent, of course, versus the currencies of those host countries or those host businesses. It's quite a good value. But I would say where a lot of companies, kind of misstep is what you alluded to last. It is about assuming that the culture that you're building inside of, the West, for example, Europe, US, even Australia to some extent, and the culture you're trying to build in the likes of Malaysia or Southeast Asia is going to be different. It'll be
Yeah.
drastically different. Between just for Malaysia, for example, with all the public holidays and all the different religious festive seasons, in America where I'm from, it's very, very different. We've got 11 holidays a year, and, X amount of, about a similar, leave days from your business. In Malaysia, it's very different. You've got 20 plus and usually 20 plus from your company. This cannot be an apples to apples kind of scenario. You need to kind of get the highest percentage with the highest yield, that will kind of, get everybody on the same page. But you have to do away with that mindset that everything is going to be same. Everything is not going to be a mirrored image. You're going to have to tailor, you're going to have to customize, you're going to have to be a bit creative. But if you think about these things, if you talk about them, if your leaders are having these kinds of discussions, in my opinion, you'll always be headed to the right place.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, this is why international experience in my opinion matters so much, right? The more accustomed and the more adaptable you are to different people, different cultures, different countries, different realities, I think in a lot of ways it shapes your worldview and it shapes your leadership thinking and leadership capabilities. And there's one piece of advice I have for young people is travel the world as much as you can, go work in as many different countries as you can, because that will hold you good long term from a leadership perspective.
And I echo that. I've been an expat for about 13 years now, and I can't say I'm ever going back. See the world, experience new things, take all of those skills, all those experiences with you, regardless of where you're at. And, your company will be definitely thanking you for it. To you, Sumesh, thank you so much for your time and your insights and, your passion about what you do. I really appreciate it. And I definitely know that our listeners will as well. Thank you so much again, mate.
All right. Thanks, Donnie.
Thank you for listening to the STEM Career Coach with Donnie Maclary. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more inspiring stories and actionable tips. Catch you next time.